She popped my buds last night, pre-flight. 0 hour, 9 a.m. And I'm gonna be high as a kite by then. Miss the earth so much, I miss my wife. It's lonely out in space on such a time like this flight. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me right to the line. Now, man, if you guys
I still remember that my term paper investigated the use of linguistic theory to determine if universal translation was indeed possible. We might indeed encounter other life, but could we interpret meaning from other different planetary cultures? My other favorite university course was on science fiction literature. I remember a classmate challenged a particular novel with the critique, "Well, that could never really happen." We were shocked when our easygoing, good-humored professor snapped at her. He just snapped. "Well, you should never, ever read fiction. Ever. Read instruction manuals." Because none of this was likely to have ever really happened. To be sure, I agreed with Professor Mead, but it wasn't until much later in life that I understood the passion of his response. I am a fan of science fiction because it deals with prophecy and possibility. Prophecy, big word, but it means look at where we are. Look at where we're headed. If this, then that. So using the reference point in time of where we are now, in its current realm of wisdom, science fiction challenges the precedent of what we believe we know. It looks at the many times we thought we knew about the universe, about medicine, about health and exercise and diet, about physics. Science fiction reminds us that projected into an alternative present or into an unknowable future, so much of what we do now was once the stuff of fantasy. Kirk to bridge. Remember when this was the stuff of science fiction? Look, no wires. Science fiction gives us a unique lens, allowing us to step outside of our cherished assumptions of what we believe we are certain of. It challenges us to see it from beyond. It invites us to look at ourselves outside of our own time, outside of our current frame of reference, beyond our social norms, beyond cultural assumptions, beyond even our species. And from this unique lens, we are invited to examine from a new distance things about ourselves as humans that we may not have been otherwise able or willing to confront. Such was truly the case of the original Star Trek television series. I don't remember a time in my life when some version of the sci-fi series Star Trek was not on television, rerun or otherwise. The original series was conceived by Gene Roddenberry as a kind of wagon train set in the stars. Beginning in 1966, its first iteration ran only 3 years, but gained momentum and new fans in syndication, spawning a movie franchise and several new generation spin-off series. The 3-year original Star Trek series featured an extraordinarily diverse cast, manning and womaning the Starship Enterprise. 1966. It was led by Canadian actor William Shatner as the canny and cunning and impatient Captain James T. Kirk. The crew included an African-American woman as its communications officer, an Asian helmsman, a Scottish engineer, and even, in the middle of the Cold War, a Russian navigator. But it took diversity even one step further. included Mr. Spock, a science officer with distinctive pointy ears because he's only half human. Spock's father is a Vulcan, a race of humanoids who nearly destroyed themselves because they once ruled with unbridled passion. Aggression and war were the answers to any conflict. Over generations, though, they created spiritual practices that trained their brains to deal solely with reason and logic. No emotion, by which they largely achieved peace and were able to advance to new technological heights. How Vulcans achieve a culture dictated by logic is largely through meditative practice and ritual, creating space between our reptile brain reaction to stimulus and one's ability to respond with more calculation, more distance. A calculation that, while wholly rational, does not exclude the value of one's relationship to a community. A central plot point in the Star Trek franchise is the Vulcan axiom that dictates the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. The value of community, says Spock, is only logical. Therefore, in the world of Star Trek, the wisest decisions are shown to be those that are mediated in a leadership community, balanced between reason and emotion. The strength of the Enterprise crew, its success, is in their collaborative model of mutual support. The interplay between information and intuition. The balance of passion and patience. That the Star Trek characters represent archetypes along a continuum between raw emotion and mercenary logic would take a whole other sermon to unpack. But suffice it to say, it is yet another representation of diversity on the bridge. Starfleet is bound by the prime directive of the United Federation of Planets. And Charlotte will say more about this, but the prime directive prohibits anyone from interfering with the internal development of alien civilizations. In other words, the 5-year mission of the Starship Enterprise is exploration without exploitation, observation without provocation, witness without warfare. In encountering strange new lands and cultures, the prime directive affirms diversity for diversity's sake as a universal and necessary value. That value of diversity forms the very basis of Vulcan philosophy. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations. Here is the world of the possible, that the foundational level of logic rests on the bedrock of honoring diversity as paramount for our collective success. It is this message of diversity and the mirroring of the shortcomings of 1960s North America that has captured our imaginations and made Star Trek an enduring and endearing message. The realm not just of cool computers, communicators, universal translators, warp speed, and mind melds, but also in Star Trek's ability to transport us. Beam me up, Scotty. There is no intelligent life here. Science fiction helps us to blast us out of our cozy assumptions. Phaser blast off the port valve! Oh, you know you want to do that. that. Don't you? Okay. All right. The series had very few special effects. So to show a phaser blast that they were being attacked, the actors would simply lunge and the camera would tilt. Okay? So you ready for this? So here we go. Get prepared. All right. On cue, the blast is going to be coming from the exit sign. So you're going to have to lunge toward the piano. Are the cameras ready? Oh, you want to catch this, don't you? All right, on cue. Phaser blast off the starboard bow. Photon torpedo, port side Leonard Nimoy, the actor who played Mr. Spock, was familiar with being attacked. He grew up as an Orthodox Jew in an Irish neighborhood in Boston during the Depression. So he was no stranger to being bullied, no stranger to being an outsider with one foot in two different worlds, no stranger to the tension between the roots of community and the wings and call of individualism. Nimoy understood the influential power of religious ritual as a mediator between logical discernment and relational compromise. In fact, the Vulcan hand salute, "Live long and prosper," was inspired by a Jewish blessing that he remembered from childhood. It was a powerful, magic moment that he witnessed in a synagogue, and everyone assembled was ordered to hide under a prayer shawl, to hide their eyes. But he peeked, and what he saw were the rabbis blessing the congregation. When Leonard Nimoy died earlier this year, we lost not just an actor, but an outspoken activist who championed racial diversity, gender equality, and gay rights. He once jeopardized his own contract negotiations when he found out that the producers of a cartoon version of Star Trek had no plans for including any non-Anglo actors from the show. When Nimoy found out, he threatened to walk off the show, telling producers, "Star Trek is about diversity, and the actors that most represent that diversity must be included to truly represent what Star Trek was all about. If you won't have them," he said, "then you can't have me." Sure enough, the appropriate actors were soon cast. The seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism reminds us that we humans are just a tiny part of an interconnected web of existence. It reminds us as humans that we are one. As a species, we are one. And our divisions are illusion. That we must treat one another with compassion does not require a Vulcan mind meld to understand. Achieving human peace may seem improbable from the standpoint of our current history. Addressing climate change may seem impossible from the standpoint of our global economics. But from the lens of entire galaxies, full of potential life forms of infinite diversity, our differences, the differences between humans, dim into irrelevance. Science fiction is like 16th century astronomer Galileo, urging a complacently narcissistic humanity to look through that telescope and discover we are not the center of the universe. May we heed the lessons of this intergalactic perspective.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. Commencing countdown, engines on. Check ignition and may God
ideas and memories when I start thinking about Star Trek. As a long-time fan of Star Trek, it is bound up in the narrative of my life. For instance, in high school, I was the girl with the Star Trek lunchbox. But let's be clear, it was high school and nobody was using lunchboxes. I was always able to draw parallels between the messages conveyed in Star Trek and our UU principles. This was especially true when I designed and taught a Sunday school curriculum based on episodes of Voyager. I'm not quite sure when Rev Jess put the call out for doing a service on Star Trek that she was quite prepared for my treasure trove of accumulated treasures, but she was enthusiastic. Star Trek is a narrative of exploration. As Unitarian Universalists, we frame our religious experience as personal journeys of exploration, which we share within our UU community. The Prime Directive, or the Non-Interference Directive, is one of the core tenets of the Star Trek universe. That is a guiding principle in their journey of exploration. This general order number 1 has 2 parts. The first is non-interference with pre-warp civilizations, and the second part is non-interference in internal matters of civilizations. If you have watched the show, you know that they don't always manage to follow this directive, though always with good reasoning. There are very good critiques of this both within the show as they wrestle with following the directive and in analyses of the show. There are also some very good critiques about the negative aspects of the Prime Directive, but today I will be looking at it from a mostly optimistic view of what it was intended to convey. Non-interference in internal matters of a civilization should seem familiar because it is also a tenet of the United Nations and international law. Though its roots can be traced earlier, it really developed throughout the 20th century. The intent is to curtail the hubris of one nation in assuming it knows best and in imposing its values and culture on another. When simply looked at in these terms, it is easy to agree on this as important, especially after looking at the events of the 19th and even 20th century. However, even the UN has put caveats on this as an attainable dogmatic approach. It nonetheless remains highly problematic, as we can see in current events, for example in Libya and Syria. When looking at its portrayal in Star Trek, there is only so much that we can ask for in the creation of a fictional law. But as Rev Jess discussed earlier, it is through fiction, and especially science fiction in particular, that provides us with opportunities to examine our assumptions and think about the impact of our decisions. The roots around non-interference with pre-warp civilizations are clearly a reaction to the imperialism and warfare of the 19th and 20th centuries. While on balance, we recognize that in the Star Trek universe, this comes from a positive value of wanting to allow cultures to develop in their own way without interference, until such time as during their own exploration they would encounter others. The underlying assumption of this is a linear model of history as progress, and in this case, particularly technological progress. The importance that the Prime Directive has is to emphasize that might and technological superiority does not make interference right, and that we acknowledge that the interactions have unknown effects. So it's a little philosophy from quantum and chaos theories for those of you keeping track of such things. In Unitarian Universalism, we struggle to recognize our inherent assumptions and to question. We recognize that the way we may approach something or think about something is only one way, and that others with different backgrounds or life experiences will approach it differently. However, as we look at our principles and purposes, I think we are also struggling to define common principles and values that will create a world that celebrates and supports diversity in many forms. It is this examination of moral conundrums that draws so many to Star Trek, including myself. I do not have a unique narrative of being a Star Trek fan. I've never been quite like my peers, which growing up can obviously be heart-wrenching. Although all teenagers go through that search for establishment of identity and personhood, separate from their parents and nuclear family, and reconciling how the world really works. In Star Trek, I was able to see a future that seemed to have solved so many of the problems, like poverty, hunger, and war, at least on Earth. The human race was able to embrace learning, blending science and the arts, a place where rationality and teamwork were commonplace. Knowing that there was a community of Trekkies out there who thought the same was empowering. There was no email or internet then, so fanzines were the only outlet I had. Star Trek helped me to feel that I had a place and that I could be myself, as did my church community. The original series, the plots, the interplay between characters, and the vision of the future still speak to us today, even if we find the clothes, hairstyles, and sets amusing. It was a different time and place, with different issues and concerns, and what they did was groundbreaking at the time. Though today parts of it are dated, that is, not as diverse or as accepting as we would like today, should not take away from what they accomplished. Star Trek continues to be a beacon of hope, offering an example of how the world could be, just as Unitarian Universalism offers hope to me that we can come together and make the world a better place.
These are the voyages of personal discovery, an ongoing mission to explore spiritual growth, to seek out new ideas and new relationships, to boldly go where your conscience takes you.